I'll be honest, driving in the fog is not one of my favorite things to do behind the wheel of a car. I'm always afraid of something appearing right in front of me and not having enough time to react to avoid hitting it, like the time a deer jumped out in front of my car on the way back from Wilmington, North Carolina. It appeared out of nowhere. I hit it, and then it rolled over my windshield and then darted into the woods from which it came. If that isn't enough to scare the bejesus out of a person, I don't know what does. Whereas the fog out over the ponds at our house has a mystical quality to them that I quite like. I feel as though Sherlock Holmes will suddenly appear out of nowhere in his effort to solve a mysterious murder like the Hounds of Baskerville. As you can tell, I grew up on Sherlock Holmes mysteries that starred Basil Rathbone and still love murder mysteries today. Have you ever noticed that the fog can be a character in these mysteries as the killer jumps out of the mist to do his dirty deed, or a clue pops up that solves the case? I mention this because in our reading from Matthew, the mist once again plays a central part in our narrative. It all begins with James, Peter, and John, the favored three, going up to a mountain with Jesus to pray. Immediately, this calls to mind Moses going up to the mountain to receive the 10 Commandments. You recall that Moses was up on the mountain covered with mist. Only the sound of thunder and the crack of lightning penetrated the thick fog. The children of Israel even wonder if Moses had been consumed by God's wrath on that mountain, for it had been 40 days and no sign of Moses. So they asked Aaron to make a golden calf who would go before them and lead them to the promised land. And we know how well that worked out, don't we? So I can imagine that the disciples that were left behind are thinking whether or not something bad will happen to James, Peter, and John, and to Jesus as they ascend up into the mist on top of the mountain. Then we're told by Matthew that as they're praying, something happens to Jesus that catches their eye. His entire appearance is transfigured. His clothes are a dazzling white, whiter than any bleach could make them. What James, Peter, and John behold is Jesus in his glorified state. His divinity is shining through. And if this wasn't a sight to behold, standing next to Jesus are Moses and Elijah, and they too are shining like the sun in their glorified state. Moses represents the law, and Elijah represents the prophets. It is as if the law and the prophets bear witness that Jesus is the Christ. This is what Peter's confession at Caesarea Philippi not 6 days ago was all about when Peter said to Jesus, "Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God." It seems that Moses and Elijah's appearance only confirms this. But why are they talking to Jesus? Could it have something to do with how Jesus plans to fulfill his role as the long-awaited Messiah? Is it time to go to Jerusalem to confront the powers that be, like Moses did to Pharaoh, like Elijah did with Ahab? Has Jesus' Galilean ministry come to an end? And should he go to Jerusalem knowing that death awaits him, that as a suffering servant of Isaiah will be handed over to the religious leaders to be beaten, killed, and then rise again? Or did Jesus think he was going to Jerusalem to set up his kingdom? Not the kingdom of Caesar, but the kingdom of God. So much to discuss with Moses and Elijah in so little time. And before you know it, they were gone. What to make of what they just saw? Peter, not one to stop and think before he spoke, a true extrovert in this regard, blurts out that it was indeed good that we've just witnessed this sight, and we need to preserve it for posterity. So let us build 3 shrines to mark this theophany of seeing Jesus, Moses, and Elijah in their glorified state, as if each are on the same level, but we know that they are not. Moses and Elijah bear witness to Jesus that he is the Messiah, the Son of God. And if you do not believe them, believe the testimony of the law and the prophets. That Peter got the meaning of what he saw all wrong should not surprise, for this is the problem with all theophanies. We all experience the holy in our midst at one time or another in our lives. These liminal experiences on the edge of life and death are what the Celts called the thin places. What Rudolf Otto called the mysterium tremendum. But what does our experience with the holy mean? Out of the fog of uncertainty comes clarity in time. And our story, out of the midst, Peter, James, and John hear the divine voice say, "This is my Son, the beloved, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." For the astute reader of Matthew's gospel, this is precisely what the divine voice out of the cloud said to Jesus at his baptism. Except this time something new was added. It is the imperative, listen to Jesus. Isn't it ironic, with all the focus on Transfiguration Sunday, on what James, Peter, and John saw, Jesus transfigured before them, that the divine voice would have us focus on what was spoken. Listen to Jesus. This should not surprise us if we understand the nature of the Jewish religion. Despite all the theophanies experienced in the Old Testament, like the burning bush that is not consumed, the thunder and lightning and the quaking of the mountain, the voice out of the whirlwind, the emphasis of all these theophanies is on what was heard. Israel's God forbids the making of idols. Listen how the writer of Deuteronomy puts it. Since you saw no form when the Lord spoke to you at Horeb out of the fire, take care and watch yourself closely so that you not act corruptly by making an idol for yourselves in the form of any figure, like the likeness of a male or female, the likeness of any animal that is on the earth, the likeness of any winged bird that flies in the air, the likeness of anything that creeps on the ground, the likeness of any fish that's in the water under the earth. So you see, from the very beginning of Israel's relationship with Yahweh, the focus was not on what was seen, but what was heard. Moses was appointed by God and the people to be that go-between, the one who would deliver God's message to the people and the one who would deliver the people's message to God. But after Moses dies, then who will be the next Moses? According to Deuteronomy, God promises such a person. Listen. The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among your own people. You shall heed such a prophet. This is what you requested of the Lord your God at Horeb on the day of the assembly, when you said, if I hear the voice of the Lord my God anymore, or ever again see this great fire, I will die. Then the Lord replied to me, they are right when they have said, I will raise up from them a prophet like you from among their own people. I will put my words in the mouth of the prophet who shall speak to them, and everything that I command. Anyone who does not heed the words of the prophet shall speak in my name. I myself will hold accountable. What all of this means is that Peter, James, and John, if they knew their Torah, would know that God was raising a prophet up like Moses, but yet greater than Moses, who would speak for God. And it was incumbent upon them to listen. Speaking of listening, how well do we do it? By listening, I do not mean waiting till there's a pause in the conversation to start talking again. By listening, I do not mean presuming you know what the person's going to say, so you interrupt to push the conversation forward. I know of what I speak because I'm guilty of doing this, especially in conversation with my spouse. It has been said that when you've been married a long time, you can finish each other's sentences. Well, that may be true, but I'm here today to say that's not a good thing. By listening, I mean to give room for silence, for the words and the meaning of the words, the echo from the Word to dwell richly within us. This is the purpose of contemplation, for the absence of words to become the presence of the Word. It's been likened to a cow eating and eating again, chewing on a word or a thought till there's illumination out of the cloud of unknowing, to wait until you hear the divine voice speak before we do or say something rash, like Peter did. Listen to Jesus, is what the voice said above. And the very next words out of Jesus' mouth are, tell no one about the vision until after the Son of Man has been raised from the dead. What? Tell no one about what we just saw. I want to shout it from the mountaintops. And yet they must be silent on what they saw until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead. Little would they know that within a month Jesus would be dead. It is as if Jesus knows that we will not understand what we have seen until we've seen the manner in which he has died. This seems to be the fate of the prophets. They speak truth to power, and the power strike back to silence them. This was certainly true for Oscar Romero, who was the Archbishop of El Salvador, gunned down as he celebrated Mass and refused to hide behind the altar when the convertible with men carrying rifles turned around and started firing. One will never truly understand Oscar Romero, the martyr, until one knows the story of Oscar Romero, the Archbishop. At the height of his power, coronated as the leader of the Roman Catholic Church in El Salvador, the people in power celebrated that day until Romero turned against them to be a strong voice for justice. The path to glory for Archbishop Romero was martyrdom, as it was for Jesus. We see this when the Roman centurion exclaimed after witnessing the manner in which Jesus died, he said, truly, this man was the Son of God. Transfiguration is the path of martyrdom. It is the personal price servants of God pay for witnessing to the truth. Jesus understood this better than anyone, for he will give those coming down the mountain an invitation to follow. If you would be my disciple, deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. Between transfiguration and ascension, from one mountaintop vista to another mountaintop vista, there is the journey to the cross. Ash Wednesday is the beginning of Lent. The theme of this year's Lenten journey is out of the ashes we rise. For we remember the words of Paul that if we die with Christ, we shall also rise with Christ. For out of death is the promise of new life, like the phoenix rising out from among the ashes. So I invite you to take the Lenten journey with Jesus for the next 6 weeks. Come to an Ash Wednesday service to hear the words, if you die with Christ, you shall rise with him. Join a small group to be strengthened in the Word. We're studying the 5 essential practices that make up the walk with Christ. The sign-up is in the well. And 10 special services on Monday, Thursday, and Good Friday to allow all that was said about Jesus to be buried like the seed within the ground, waiting to burst forth with new life. So that on Easter we may worship the one crucified, who has been raised. Out of the ashes we rise, and to think it all begins from out of the mist. God comes again and speaks his life-saving word. Listen to Jesus. Listen to Jesus. Listen to Jesus. Amen.